Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce first Dean Martha Minow, who is the Morgan and Helen Chu Dean and Professor. She is the 12th Dean since HLS started 199 years ago. She is an expert in human rights, civil rights, and constitutional law. Dean Minow currently is the Vice Chair of the Legal Services Corporation, which is the national support for civil legal assistance for low-income Americans. She is also currently a member of the Commission on Countering Violent Extremism, run by the Center for Strategic and International Studies and headed by Tony Blair and Leon Panetta. She's the author of and editor of 16 books. She has served on the Independent International Commission on Kosovo and on a collaboration between the United States Department of Education and the Center for Applied Special Technology designed to enable curricular access for students with disabilities. She's a graduate of the University.
Oh, applaud the dean, come on.
And without further ado, Dean Minow.
Thank you. Thank you. So, welcome. I can't imagine a more wonderful way to welcome you than to have with us one of my heroes, Chief Judge Merrick Garland. He is the Chief Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. Which is often described in the United States as the second most significant court in the country. I think you've heard the most significant one.
Yeah. The other circuits don't have that view, by the way.
His career has spanned public service, private practice, litigation, negotiation, law school teaching, scholarship, and mentoring of students and lawyers. He grew up in Illinois, which is another thing I think is excellent about him, since I did too. He came to Harvard College after winning a scholarship. He graduated summa cum laude. He studied here at Harvard Law School, where he served as a counselor for undergraduates and also sold his comic book collection, doing both in part to help pay the bills. He graduated magna cum laude and served as an editor of the Harvard Law Review. He served as a law clerk for two of the most distinguished jurists in this country, Judge Henry Friendly and Justice William Brennan. His jobs have included 3 high posts in the U.S. Department of Justice: Special Assistant to the Attorney General of the United States, Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General. You're going to have to explain all those to us. He's also served as a federal prosecutor and as a lawyer at a leading private law firm. Chief Justice John Roberts, also a graduate of the Harvard Law School, once said, and I quote him, "Anytime Judge Garland disagrees, you know you're in a difficult area." As a student president of his high school, he successfully persuaded a change in the dress code. He spent one summer... He spent one summer as a shoe store stock clerk. So we're all going to study your appearance in great detail. His wonderful wife, Lynn, is here. They have 2 terrific daughters, one of whom is also here. And President Barack Obama, also a graduate of the Harvard Law School, nominated Chief Judge Garland to serve on the United States Supreme Court. He's a busy guy, and yet he is so generous to take a precious day to come here to welcome you. I have the privilege now of asking some questions. Chief Judge Garland.
Fire away.
What do you remember about when you started law school? You just started to have some recollections as we walked across the campus.
Yeah, as we were walking on the path which we took through Langdell, unfortunately what I recollect is that the paper chase had just come out the winter before, so all of the prospective 1Ls en masse went to the theater in Harvard Square and were scared out of our minds. So that's pretty much how I began Harvard Law School.
Why did you go to law school in the first place?
Chemistry. Well, chemistry and math. Well, not doing as well in chemistry and math as...
You were going to be a doctor.
I was going to be a doctor, and I wanted to do public service, and I actually thought medicine was the best way to do this, most direct one-on-one. You actually see the results of what you do. But it did turn out that I would turn out to be better in social science than in physical and biological sciences. And I had a very good scholarship advisor who said, you can do public service in all different ways. You should do the one that feels most comfortable to you, and you'll be able to do the best in that. So that's how I ended up in law school.
We are very, very lucky. One of your early jobs was serving as special assistant to Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti. That was between 1979 and 1981. What does that mean? What did that entail?
Well, it's a little bit like being in the room where it happens, as you might steal somebody else's phrase, but only being a fly on the wall in the room where it happens. You pretty much, you're like a law clerk to the Attorney General, which is what it was. 3 movies were made of the period in which, a very short period in which I was in the Justice Department. American Hustle, about the Abscam case. Argo, about the exfiltration of hostages in Iran. And most important, The Miracle on Ice, which was about the Lake Placid Olympics, where I did work on the security for the Olympics. So you can see just from those the broad breadth of things that somebody working as a special assistant in the Justice Department does. But it is more watching other people, putting in your 2 cents every once in a while than actually making the decisions.
It is a kind of job I think many people don't know exists. It's being an assistant, relatively short time out of law school for people at the top of the government. You also worked at a law firm at Arnold & Porter as an associate and then as a partner. What was that like?
It's a great experience. You have in the law firms the opportunity to really learn how to, I was a litigator and a counselor in antitrust, to learn how to do things the right way, to have relatively, at least in those days, unlimited resources to do as much as you needed to do. Learn how to write memos the right way, and that's a very good experience to have whatever you're going to do later. I tried a number of cases while I was there. That was also great, seeing great trial lawyers try cases and be part of the team that tried the cases. I had an opportunity to do a lot of pro bono work, which was very good, mostly working for individuals in a whole different variety of things, from criminal protesters being arrested. And then I had the opportunity to work on a case that went to the Supreme Court, what's now called the State Farm case. We represented State Farm in a attempt to get airbags and automatic seatbelts in cars.
So at the private firm, you maybe had some more resources than at other places, and by working on antitrust, you actually picked up some of what you had done as an undergraduate, right?
Yes, that's right.
And then we actually asked you to come here and teach antitrust law because you knew something about it.
Well, I'm not sure whether that was the reason or you just had a hole in the faculty at the time. I don't know. Phil Arita, for whom Arita Hall is named, and well-deserved honor, was one of my mentors at the law school. I worked on the first couple volumes of his treatise, and he asked me to come, and it was the hardest job I've ever had. Just so you guys know, it looks really easy. You know, they stand up, they talk, they ask a bunch of questions. They don't even have to tell you the answers. But it's, on average, took me about 4 hours outside of class for every 1 hour that I was in class, in order to figure out what questions to ask, in order to get things to go in the right direction. So I had a huge amount of respect for people who do this.
Well, you're speedy. It takes me about 8 hours for every hour in class. My grandmother said to me, "Tell me this again. You're in the classroom 5 hours a week. That's a job." Yeah, right. And then you became a prosecutor. That's a little bit unusual. Why and how did that happen?
Well, I've been wanting to do public service. As I said, that's what I came in to law school for the purpose of. It's a little bit of serendipity. I worked on a criminal antitrust trial at Arnold & Porter. That sort of moved me from counseling and other kind of work with respect to antitrust into the criminal stage. I got to be a criminal defense lawyer. Also, luckily at Arnold & Porter, we represented the state of Maryland in a savings and loan case, a big civil trial charging fraud in a savings and loan. The judge in the case was a former prosecutor and former public defender, and during one of the breaks he said, "You're wasting your life. You should be a prosecutor." I felt bad. No one should waste their life. And 5 days later, and totally accidentally, serendipitous again, the U.S. attorney called me and said he wanted me to come to work there. I had been on the opposite side of a case from him when I had been in private practice. So I figured those were two signs, and I decided that that's what I would do.
So there are a couple things about this that are interesting. One, that life isn't always linear.
Yeah.
And two, that you maybe should be open to the serendipity.
Yeah.
Three, that you didn't mention, you took a pay cut.
Yeah. In case you don't know, they make more in law firms than they make in the private sector. If no one's told you that, you should. But that's right. But as I tell my law clerks, you can. There's lots of different things that you can do. There's lots of different ways to do public service. And if you want to work in the public sector, the most important thing is to not get a mortgage that ties your hand with golden handcuffs. You get a mortgage that you can afford. Work in the private sector, build up the treasury, and then you can go in the government if you're able, depending on your responsibilities. But I would say very important, which is to follow, to not have a big plan. You can make a plan for 5 years out, but you never have any idea of what's going to come. And as you said, I went from thinking I was going to be a professor, thinking I was going to be in antitrust, becoming interested in criminal law. At one point, I thought I would head the criminal division in the Justice Department. That was the job I was actually nominated for. Suddenly, there was a spot on the D.C. Circuit, and I wound up a judge on the D.C. Circuit.
So as a prosecutor, what was new and challenging? I mean, you'd been a defense, criminal defense.
Yeah. Well, of course, you have the power of the grand jury, which you don't have as a defense lawyer. But what really was a really significant difference was I went from doing white-collar antitrust, white-collar fraud on both sides, to doing violent crime right away, to hoping your witnesses would show up at the trial. And I'm talking about the police witnesses. The other witnesses, you had to send out the marshals to arrest and bring in to be witnesses. Direct personal interaction with victims. My first case involved a public housing project in the district that had been taken over by a violent gang from New York. The mothers and grandmothers terrorized, and we had to, earn their trust, wow. their belief that we would succeed in getting these people arrested and getting them convicted, that they wouldn't come back and kill them. So it's enormously different than the kind of work you do in a law firm as a general matter, as you can imagine.
You served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Criminal Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, and then, as I mentioned, Principal Deputy for the Deputy Attorney General. And so on a day-to-day basis, what did this entail? You're no longer just in the room. Yeah,
well, yes, you're right. So now you're actually in the room where it happens, and you actually have some say over what happens. In the criminal division, my job, ranged from overseeing the white-collar fraud and appellate sections. In the Deputy Attorney General's office, I did everything from investigate the Unabomber to plan security precautions for the Summer Olympics and then for the upcoming Winter Olympics. To work on espionage cases, national security cases, violent crime cases. And to work on civil rights, investigations of, particularly in the criminal area, of criminal civil rights violations.
Well, I want to talk about some of these. We've just had the Olympics. We were watching with great interest the challenges of security. And that was, of course, before 9/11. So how much was this something that you thought, gosh, something really terrible could go wrong? What did you have to do to make sure that things were okay?
Well, history has a bad way of repeating itself. You remember Black September took over in Munich and killed a number of athletes. And that very much drove the fear of what might happen in the Olympics, at least in the early Olympics. Then there was, by the time of the actual Olympics, Oklahoma City had happened. So there was fear of domestic terrorism as well as a fear of international terrorism. And I think it was, justified to be worried. The Olympics provides an international stage, and so it took an enormous amount of effort by, literally thousands of people to provide security, everything from specialized teams to the people who meet you at the magnetometers.
So you mentioned Oklahoma City. Some people, many people in the room weren't born, don't know about it. This was a terrifying and terrible event in this country. What happened and what was your role?
So really not born. That really hurts. So this was 1995, and well, I'll just talk you through my own experience for Oklahoma City. I'm sitting at my desk and start getting emails from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oklahoma that there's been an explosion at the federal building in Oklahoma City, and they thought it was a gas leak or something like that. You guys have lots of news sources. In those days, CNN was actually the only 24/7, always on, and it took them about an hour to a little bit less than an hour to get up a picture of the building in Oklahoma City, which had a third of the building had collapsed, and a large bomb had exploded, and it looked just like the Marine barracks, which had collapsed in Lebanon during the Reagan administration. Hezbollah had blown up the Marine barracks there. So, of course, our original thought was fear of international terrorism. The U.S. Attorney in Oklahoma had just become a judge, very fine district judge, leaving the spot open, and we thought there was going to be a national. We thought there was at the same time calls in from all over the country, bomb truck seen here, bomb truck seen here. None of which turned out to be true, but still a great fear that this was going to be the beginning of some kind of wave of bombing. This is one of these things where it's not just being in the room when it happens, but it's having gone through a lot of the kind of work necessary to be ready for this kind of thing to be happening. So the advantage of being on the line as an assistant U.S. attorney was I knew how grand jury investigations worked, I knew how telephone investigations worked, I knew how credit card investigations worked, and because I'd been at the Justice Department, I knew the FBI agents who would soon be going out there to manage the investigative part of the team. So I asked to go out there, and the Attorney General sent me, and as I'm going out there, we are starting to find at the same time who did it. There was the force of the bomb was 2,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate, which is fertilizer mixed with, and then mixed with fuel oil and nitromethane, which is racing oil. And the bomb was in a Ryder truck. The effect of the explosion was to blow parts of the truck several blocks away. The axle of the truck landed on a car, which was fortunate in the sense that the person had gotten out of the car, and fortunate in the sense that every axle has a VIN number, a vehicle identification number on it. So we were able to trace the vehicle identification number to a Ryder truck rental place in Kansas, just north of Oklahoma City. And then there was a really great sketch artist who was also famous for having done one of the Unabomber sketches. And she did a perfect sketch of what turned out to be Timothy McVeigh. The FBI went around in concentric circles to motels, and they located a woman named Leah McGowan, who was the proprietress of the Dreamland Motel, where McVeigh had checked in and had parked his Ryder truck. From that, he had used a false name when he rented the truck from Ryder, Mr. Kling. This was a play on Klingon, which at least some of you know what that is. That's from Star Trek, the villains in the early Star Treks. And but when he checked in at the Dreamland, he used his real name. So in those days, you could not fly directly from Washington, D.C. to Oklahoma City in the FBI plane. We had to stop in Indiana. By the time I got to Indiana, I was handed a cell phone, which in those days was
it's a big thing.
Size of a brick.
Yeah, right.
And they had found him
So fast.
by incredible good police work and luck. A Oklahoma State trooper with the name Charlie Hanger, could not have been a more TV-ready name, had stopped him an hour and a half away from Oklahoma City, about 80 miles away, because he did not have a license plate on the truck, on his car. He had parked a getaway car. He thought he was being clever, took the getaway car's license plate off the car, and forgot to put it on before he got away. And he was stopped, and he had a weapon, and he didn't have a permit for the weapon, so he was put in jail overnight, and that was all it took for the FBI to find him. So I arrive at Oklahoma City, and it's dark, and it is as if it were, I'm trying to think of the right metaphor, a war zone. There was about a 16-block radius where lots of buildings had been badly damaged by the force of a 2,000-pound blast. The National Guard had ringed it with Humvees, and you had to get through it in order to get to the site. The courthouse, the federal courthouse, was right behind the federal building and had been damaged, so the initial hearing for McVeigh was at an Air Force base. And driving into the Air Force base for me to do the preliminary examination and explain what the government's position was, and there was a mob outside. And everybody thought it was a pitchfork mob. It turned out it was the press. And they wanted into the Air Force base. Because it was an Air Force base, they weren't letting people into the Air Force base. So fortunately, I knew the FBI agents from previous experience, and I told them we're not going to have the first investigation of a domestic terrorism conspiracy in secret. So they went out, they let the press in, and that was my introduction.
Wow.
After he was held, we went to the site. It was a huge crater. The front of the building had been blown off, and the front of the building was where the child care center.
Your boss, Jamie Gorelick, recalls that at that time she had young children, you had young children.
One of them right there.
One of them over here. That must have been just a horrific experience. And as a prosecutor, I think many people don't really think about this, but you're dealing with victims.
Yeah. There were 168 people killed, and every one of them had a relative, a friend, a daughter, a son, spouse, and there's a lot of experience with the victims in those sort of circumstances, and an important part of the role in a circumstance, particularly of a mass terrorist attack, is persuading people that the rule of law will persevere, that they can trust the justice system, not take things into their own hands. And we made a promise that we would find the people who did this. I will say, with respect to my own daughter, at the first press conference afterwards, my wife and my daughter watched it on television, and thereafter, whenever they wanted to see me, my daughters thought all they had to do was turn on the television, and
that would have been good.
There I would be. I was on a little bit, but not very much.
Well, Oklahoma City's gone on to have a memorial, and that lawsuit still stands as a real turning point in the treatment of terrorism, domestic terrorism. I'm now serving on a commission. We talk about it. It's a big deal. And you also mentioned the Unabomber case, which came up during the same time. Yes,
during the same time. The Unabomber Well, he turned out to be, so the name, this is not to be intended as a dig to FBI profilers, but the original FBI profile was a Southern California machinist for an airline, because the original bombing was a United Airlines bombing. He had package bombs which exploded in airlines and which he sent to people.
And to professors.
Professors, yeah. Yes. And it turned out he was maybe math genius is too high, but he was this is one of the Harvard graduates we don't talk about. He was a Harvard graduate student in math, and he was sending these bombs. He had stopped sending them for a while. Apparently, Timothy McVeigh got him jealous because during Oklahoma City, during the investigation, he threatened to blow up Los Angeles airport, that he would put a bomb in Los Angeles airport. So as a result, I acquired him as another subject, and when I came back from Oklahoma City, we continued working on that case. He sent a manifesto to the New York Times and the Washington Post explaining his reasoning in extremely distinct language. And we hoped, the Post and the Times came in and they said, we normally don't ask law enforcement what they think about whether we should publish something or not publish something, but we're concerned about whether this would just make him do more because he would have the spotlight. But we were pretty much out of leads at this point. We said, do what you want to do, but it will not harm anything to have it out there. And sure enough, within a week or 2 weeks of both newspapers publishing this 20, 30-page manifesto, we started getting we got lots of telephone calls, of course, but we got one from somebody who was quite persistent, and after a lot of negotiating, turned out to be the brother. Yeah. And he recognized the language, and he showed us pictures, the letters that he had received from his brother with very similar language, and we traced the course of the letters, the course of where the bombs came from. It all turned out it came from bus routes. He would go from a bus route in Helena, Montana, to different places to put his bombs into post offices. And then with a lot of discussing and talking to people, we found that he was sort of living in a hermit-like existence in the wilderness in Montana, and he was arrested and eventually tried. Yeah.
What are the lessons learned from this set of experiences? Really kind of terrifying. And what can law do? What are the limits of law? Here you are negotiating with the media about how to cover it. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'm not one to draw really huge lessons about law. The lessons of both of these cases, I think, were you want to be as transparent with the public as you can be. Both kinds of cases led to all kinds of conspiracy theories, as you can imagine. And on the other hand, we're doing investigations, so we're trying to keep as much of the investigation quiet until we're sure we found the witness or whatever. But we held a surprising number of press conferences in which we explained the course of the investigation and what was happening. And then, with respect to the evidence, we basically did a complete dump of all the evidence we'd gotten and gave it to the defense, so there would be no argument later. Evidence had been withheld, evidence had been secreted. Even with the best of motives, though, some evidence was found later that hadn't people didn't know where it was because it was these were national investigations. You get the best. This shows you what happens. We also have a very good system of defense in these kinds of cases. So the woman who represented Unabomber was also the woman who represented the Boston Marathon.
Really outstanding lawyer.
Outstanding lawyer, public defender. McVeigh was represented by both public defenders and an outstanding lawyer in Oklahoma, and Nichols was represented by Mike Tiger, who was a very famous criminal defense lawyer who at one point had been at
University of Texas.
University of Texas, and before that at Williamson Conley. Yeah. So, you see everybody put out all the evidence you can in a circumstance like that. We were very concerned. The most recent hot trial was the O.J. Simpson trial, which had been televised and which...
Recently a movie, yes.
Recently a movie, so once again, you're familiar with it, even if you weren't born, which you weren't for that, that's for sure. And it was regarded as theater, we were insistent that these trials would not be. In the end, the Unabomber wound up pleading guilty, but that the Oklahoma City case would not be theater. It would be presented matter of fact. Witnesses would testify, victims would testify. Both sides would have a complete opportunity at it. So that when it was over, people would feel that justice was done and that it wasn't just performance.
So this is the era of so many television shows about investigations and forensics, and here you are, you're using many of those same techniques, and yet it's also the somewhat quieter work, the not so flamboyant work that actually is the work of justice, right?
That's right. It's we were in Oklahoma City. We were basically 24/7 for weeks at a time until we figured out the people we thought were the co-conspirators. Hundreds of people. The way that the FBI found McVeigh's the key to his car, he had driven the key to the bomb truck. He had driven the bomb truck, which was this Ryder truck, down. He had another car secreted away. When he got into his car, he dropped the key to the bomb truck. So this is an important piece of evidence tying him directly to the bomb truck, even if you don't believe the sketch or any of the other evidence. This was the car that he had purchased. It was the key. He was in the car. So how did they find the key? The FBI had done a grid of the entire 16 block radius of Oklahoma City, and hundreds of police officers walked the grid looking for anything that looked out of the ordinary. They picked up this key. They marked the spot. And sometime later, once we found the hotel room that he had been in, we did a telephone search. We found he had called Terry Nichols, which was his co-conspirator. We did a search warrant in Nichols' house was a map of Oklahoma City, including an X for the spot where they were going to park the getaway car. And sure enough, we went back to the grid and asked what was found in the grid, and there was the key to the bomb truck.
Wow.
So this is it's a lot of very difficult, very
shoe leather work.
Shoe leather work.
Wow, wow, wow. So here you are. You're a judge. You're a judge at a very special court. Why is this court so special?
Well, as I said, I think most the other circuit judges do not believe that it is particularly special. And I endorse that view if any of you are out there. Look, the difference is, like all other circuit courts, we have jurisdiction over district court cases, appeals from them. These are cases that arise under the constitutional laws of the United States and or diversity jurisdiction, all things that you will soon be studying.
Diversity jurisdiction is a case arising from dispute involving citizens of different states.
That's right. And so it might be a citizen of Virginia suing a citizen of the District of Columbia, District of Columbia being treated for diversity purposes as if it were a state. But what's different for us is we are also the seat of the government. That's where most of the government offices have their headquarters, and Congress has seen it fit to put in a number of statutes, jurisdictional provisions, which say, if you don't like what the government did in this particular area, environmental protection, labor law, you pick the topic, you can either sue in the area where you're from or where the event occurred, or you can sue in the D.C. Circuit. And after 9/11, they ultimately put in the Detainee Treatment Act and the Military Commissions Act provisions saying that appeals from Guantanamo, both from habeas and from military commissions, would end up in the D.C. Circuit. So unlike maybe in the reverse of other courts, we have 40% of our cases are administrative law cases and 7% are criminal. I'd say If anything, everybody else is reversed. And even in our civil cases, about half of them have the government on one side or the other, either the government suing civilly or somebody suing the government.
And many very much headline issues, net neutrality,
Right.
Access to broadband, Environmental Protection Agency regulations, the things that really were hot in Congress. Then maybe there's an agency that enacts a rule, and there's a big debate there, and then there's a lawsuit in your court.
That's right. This, now, be clear, I haven't participated in any of these cases, but, and I haven't. But we have net neutrality. We have the clean power regulations coming up in the fall, big en banc, which I'm not going to be sitting on. We have a pending challenge to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureaus, both its constitutionality, its organization, its operations. In the Guantanamo area, last fall, we heard a case on whether inchoate conspiracy could be tried before a military commission in connection with 9/11. We have pending a case now whether the Palestinian Authority is a person for purposes of the Due Process Clause, and therefore subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So yes, we have quite a number of pretty
Gun
interesting
control,
cases.
kind of hot
Yep,
topics.
Yep.
How do you organize your office? What do you do with your law clerks? How often do you talk to another human being? How much are you not talking?
Wait, does this suggest law clerks are not human beings? Not my experience, actually. Yeah, so every judge does this differently. And every judge has to sort of array the resources available based on the judge's own perception of what the judge needs and of the judge's perception of what that judge's strengths and weaknesses are. In my case, a very important element here is ability to get along with each other. I'm not advertising for law clerks right now, but ability to get along with each other, to not have sharp elbows. We are locked in one chambers all together for 1 year. And in addition to judges, the other human beings who I mostly talk to are my law clerks. The only time we actually see lawyers are the 4 times a month when we sit. And for that's just a morning generally.
And hear oral arguments.
To hear oral argument, right. So that's a big factor. My own method of organization is, the clerks start reading the briefs, they start reading all the cases, they start reading, to start looking for things that are not cited in the briefs, thinking outside the box. Many of the cases come from district court where people have had to act really quickly, and so have not been able to develop the legal analysis and yet are stuck in whatever doctrinal box they thought was the correct box there. And so the clerks have to look outside. And then I give the clerks a week's head start, and then I do the same thing. I read the briefs, I read the cases. Hopefully by now I have to read fewer cases because some of them I've written, but at least a lot of them I've read. And then I don't do bench memos. Many judges do use bench memos.
Where the clerks write a memo to the judge about all the precedents.
Exactly. And I do better, I think, with oral discussions, so we have a sort of a continuing conversation about the case.
And do you read hard copy? Do you read online? What do you do?
Yeah. Well,
You don't have this too personal
no,
question.
it's fair. So, it's fair. So I'm actually in the first generation of Westlaw and Lexis. So I'm actually, I hate to say this, my clerks aren't listening. I'm better at this than they are, because I know how judges talk.
Sure.
And the way now in which you find things online is getting the right combinations of words. And if you know how judges talk and what kinds of things are likely to be in an opinion on the subject you want, it's easier to do the search than it is for somebody who's, just trying to imagine. I read a lot online, but I am a dedicated iPad user now. So everything gets put into PDFs onto my iPad, and then I have a great program which I'm not going to advertise because they're not paying me, which I use to mark up all the materials.
So Justice Souter, who was here not so long ago, talked about being introduced to his iPad and how wonderful it was, and you could actually hit a button, it would read it aloud. And then he said, but I didn't know how to turn it off, so I just put it in the bathroom and closed the door.
Yeah. For me, the two greatest inventions in terms of extending my lifespan were the wheeled briefcase, which you could put all your briefs in and then not have to carry, and then the iPad, where you could put everything into and you could carry under your hand. So I do not put it in the bathroom.
So in the different jobs that you've had, can you describe the work-family balance, the life balance? What's possible? Is it possible to see your family? And how does that compare at different stages of your career, public sector, private sector?
This is the part where I probably shouldn't have had them sitting in the front row. So to be honest, I would say this really more depends on the person than it does on the job. People who tend to work a lot are going to work a lot in any of these jobs, right? Yeah. And the difference actually I think, is more towards the flow of the work. So if you're a litigator, it is very up and down. Emergencies happen. If you're in court, you're pretty much 24/7 while you're in trial. If you're counseling, it's a more steady state, although you could be called by a client or anybody else at any moment. And if you're in the government, if you're in a management position, a lot of it is crisis management, and there are a lot of crises in the government. I think Walter Dellinger, who's was the head of the Office of Legal Counsel when I was in the government and was the acting Solicitor General, I think put it best when he said you have to think of your life not as a flex time, but as a flex life. And you'll have periods of your life where you're going to have to work really hard all the time, and other parts of your life where maybe you can pay back a little bit and have a little more free time, or at least work on a less up and down time. But I don't think there's no way to promise any of you that it's going to be just vacation. It's not going to be like this week maybe, but other than that, you're done.
And all of our electronic devices make it even less likely that you have a sharp demarcation between work and the rest of your life. And yet, with all of this, you have continued to do volunteer work. This is one of the many things about you that I find so impressive. So what do you do, and what is the experience like, and why do you do it?
Well, I'm a tutor in a District of Columbia elementary school. I've been doing that pretty much since I started being a judge. I'd say I've always liked this idea of counseling and tutoring. When I was in law school, I was a resident advisor in the house, and I was a proctor in the freshman yard. When I was in private practice, I did tutoring of a guy who's in our Xerox room because he wanted to finish his education. He's now, by the way, a lawyer, which is really great. Wow. But I wanted, when I became a judge, to do something where I would feel personal, direct feedback. As I said, you're a judge, you've got the human beings in your office, and then you go out and you sit on this high bench, and that's pretty much your contact. And I wanted sort of immediate contact, and I also wanted to see the results of what I was doing. You're a judge, you hope you're doing justice, you hope you're advancing the rule of law. But it's at a high theoretical, outlook kind of way when you're helping kids get over the reading hump or understanding, multiplication and what it means. You see that directly with an actual human being in front of you. It helps you get outside yourself. Yeah. And when, it helps you focus on something other than your own career and your own goals and your own stresses. So it is both an opportunity for service, and it's a wonderful thing for yourself. There's a bazillion ways to do public service of that kind, including legal services, a particularly good way. I try to speak for legal services as often as I can.
You've been a wonderful supporter.
Thank you. So everybody has a different, there's a different thing everybody can do in this regard. But I encourage everybody to find something that is, not high level, not Harvard theory, but involves, serious
Direct
one-on-one interaction with other people who need help. Yeah.
Teaching reading is particularly challenging. Do you know, have you seen the fMRIs watching what parts of the brain light up when you read? It's all of the brain.
Yeah.
You need all of it.
Just happened to have picked, since my daughter is sitting in front of you, she's the one who introduced me to fMRI. She studied psychology in college, and I had my first lecture about what fMRI was from one of her professors.
Not bad.
It's an amazing tool, but it is amazing that it does affect your entire. So the most important thing I've done in the area of reading is, not this daughter, but my other daughter had a little difficulty getting over reading, and the thing that got her over the hump was being read the Harry Potter books, and in the end, having her read the Harry Potter books to us. So one of my other part-time jobs was being on the Board of Overseers for Harvard, and I recommended that J.K. Rowling get a degree, honorary degree, which she did, and I think I'm paying her back.
And she gave a phenomenal commencement address, which is online, and I highly, highly recommend it. Among other things, the Dementors came from her experiences working with torture survivors. Really remarkable how she transmuted that, and also her classics background. Her parents said, "What will you do with classics?" Anyway.
That's right.
So we have entering students here. What is your advice?
Congratulations.
What is your advice about how to prepare for class, how to not get too stressed, how to do things like talk to human beings and do other things in law school?
Yeah. Well, I wish I could tell you that everything's going to be easy. It's not. I mean, for some people this will come easy. For some people this will come hard. As for some people, some parts will come easy, some parts will come hard. Don't get too down on yourself about this. It's just the way it is. One of my favorite lines from Harry Potter is Dumbledore saying to Harry, it's not what your abilities are that make you what you are, it's your choices. So make good choices. I think you have to study hard in the beginning. This thing about learning to be a lawyer, there is an important element of this that's actually true, and at least learning to be a law student, and the hardest part is the first year. But you'll get the hang of it. Some will take a little bit longer, some a little bit less, but I would try to get the hang of it and work really hard on that. At the same time, I would try to have one thing that is outside of the law. As in my case, it was being a freshman proctor, working with people who are not in your law school, who are not doing what you're doing. And it can be anything, but something to get you out of this particular area and to give you some perspective on what you're doing.
Chief Judge Merrick Garland, you are my hero. Thank you very much for being here with us.